Well, I'm joined now by the former Conservative Cabinet Minister and leading Brexiteer John Redwood and Labour's Chuka, who led a backbench rebellion to try and keep Britain inside the single market. Well, John Redwood, let me start with you. David Davis saying nobody pretended this was going to be easy. I mean, he said in his article for Conservative Home about a year ago that he was fairly confident of a quick deal.
Well, I think he had reason to be confident because if the European Union recognise that we don't owe them lots of money other than our contributions up to the date of exit, and if they recognise that it's deeply in their interest to carry on with tariff-free, relatively barrier-free trade with us, and that is on offer, it would be much more straightforward. But as we've discovered, and as David warned us, life isn't always that simple, and it does look as if the EU wishes to make it more long-winded, and they also wish to try and extract a lot of money from us that we don't owe them. And all the time they're in that mood, it obviously delays things.
Now, what about this great repeal bill? You face a bit of a battle getting it through the Commons now. Theresa May's lost her majority.
I don't think so. The bill to send the Article 50 letter passed with an overwhelming majority, and it would be a bit odd if the MPs who voted for us to leave the EU and to send the letter to leave then turn around and deliberately tried to block the bill, which transfers all of European law into good UK law on the date we leave under the letter we've sent. And I would urge all those MPs to think again who are thinking of voting against this, because many of them love all those European laws, and this is their way to secure all that European employment legislation, for example. The main purpose of the bill is to make sure the day after we've left, all those European laws are still there in place as good British law to provide that continuity and reassurance.
So, Chuka, why would you then vote against the Great Repeal Bill?
Well, first of all, let's remember that it was many of the Vote Leave campaigners who said to your viewers that if we vote to leave the European Union, this whole process would be very easy, quite straightforward, because the Germans want to sell their cars in Britain, they'll give us what we want. And that hasn't turned out to be the case. That's a big broken promise, and it's all very well to blame the Europeans, but it's not unsurprising that they are negotiating in the fashion that they are. The second point, Ian, is this. This is such a big problem, in particular the divorce bill issue for the government, because one of the central promises of the Leave campaign was if you vote to leave, we'll see £350 million extra per week going to your public services. Obviously, if you do a divorce bill, which in principle the government has agreed to, you're not going to be able to do that. And then finally, with this repeal bill, the big issue here is the fact that it's more of a constitutional issue, it's not so related to Brexit, is that the House of Commons Library is predicting that we'll need 800 to 1,000 pieces of secondary legislation. And what the government's proposing here, the mantra was take back control, is basically to give a huge amount of power by decree to ministers without proper parliamentary oversight. And that is what is exercising people from across the House of Commons and people across the Remain Leave argument.
Right, I mean, John Redwood, this is the so-called King Henry VIII clauses that Chuka is referring to. I mean, you're a great parliamentarian. Under ordinary circumstances, you'd be absolutely outraged at a diminution of parliamentary sovereignty, wouldn't you?
This is the complete opposite of what's going on, as Chuka well knows. He's an intelligent man. What this bill does is it simply transfers all of European law into UK law. That means that in future, if the people and Parliament wish, then we have the right to amend and improve that legislation. But all we want to do at this stage is transfer it all and honour those promises, for example, that all the employment law is fully supported by both sides of the House of Commons and will operate. And the fact that you need some statutory instruments is just for technical clearing up. So, for example, a European law which refers to the UK as a member of the European Union has to be switched to say a former member of the European Union. That's the kind of thing that ministers will have powers to do by statutory instrument. Anything that is going to change the law or going to have an impact on British people will now need full parliamentary legislation with all the procedures, whereas, of course, when we were in the EU, all these laws they invented went straight through the House of Commons with no proper scrutiny, and Parliament was told we just had to approve them.
So it's just clearing up, Chuka.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But it's ludicrous nonsense. And I prefer to listen to Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, who knows a thing or two about constitutional issues. And he has written a very erudite piece in the FT over the last 24 hours, spelling out the huge, broad, sweeping powers that the repeal bill envisages giving to ministers, which many people find objectionable. And this idea, by the way, that somehow we have had EU laws imposed on us, and there hasn't been proper parliamentary scrutiny of those things. You can always have more scrutiny. Frankly, I'd like to see more scrutiny of domestic legislation, but that's also nonsense. I mean, you just look at the work that Bill Cash, a leading Brexiteer, has done on the EU Scrutiny Committee, and the days of debate that in the past have been dedicated to big EU events like the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, our entry into the European Union in the first place. And actually on some of those things, John Redwood, he was one of the people who spent a long time in the chamber arguing and debating these matters and scrutinising what the then Labour government in the case of Maastricht, certainly in the case of Lisbon, and what the government he was part of in the 90s, what they were doing. So this idea that we haven't scrutinised stuff here before on the EU front is just nonsense. It's not
now,
true.
you've moved, Chuka, Umunna, your party has come round to your point of view over the summer and now favours a longer transition period. How sincere is Jeremy Corbyn in this? Do we really believe him?
Well, all he has done is moved the party to the position of our trade unions. The TUC is absolutely clear that during a transition period, or implementation period as Theresa May calls it, it makes sense for us to stay in the single market and be part of the customs union. The CBI that represents British business, in fact many of the other business groups, they all want for a period of transition for us to stay in the single market and the customs union, and lots of civic society do. I imagine very many viewers of this business programme share the same view. I would like to see the Labour Party move its position further so that our position is for us to stay in the single market and have a customs union with the European Union after we leave, because that's the best way that we can retain the economic benefits. The businesses, the entrepreneurs watching this programme can continue to enjoy the economic and trading benefits that we have with the European Union once we have left. And the European Union is very clear about this. The only way you get the frictionless trade and the benefits of the single market and the customs union that everybody says we want is by staying in those two things. And you can do that, negotiate hard and get that once we have left the European Union, in my view.
All right, John Redwood, do you want to come back on that very briefly?
Well, indeed, I don't think that's on offer, and it's not what the British people voted for. They voted to leave the single market and customs union because, of course, it comes with financial contributions and freedom of movement attached, and those are things that the British public clearly rejected. And as to the parliamentary debate bit, Chuka's quite right that we had plenty of debate on treaty changes, but we did not have primary legislation for all those thousands of laws that the EU visited upon us. They had to go through automatically because we had no right to turn them down or amend them.
All right, very briefly, while we still have you both, it looks like Scotland's lifted the public sector pay cap. There are rumours that Theresa May's going to announce something similar. John Redwood, should they do that?
I look forward to hearing what the government's got to say. You have to remember that public sector pay not only had a cap, but has also had a series of ways in which public sector pay could be put up, and you need to look at the thing in the round and make sure that people are properly rewarded and that they get extra money for promotion and extra duties and so forth.
All right, John Redwood, Chuka, Umunna, good to see you both. Thanks for joining me.